everybody, I wanted to make some videos to go over the science behind some of the experiments that we've done with your classes. That way, if you ever wanted to do the experiments again, you could see exactly what we did. One of the experiments we made was the density rainbow. And so density is a ratio of mass to volume. Mass is a measure of how much matter do you have, how much physical matter do you have. And volume is how much space does it occupy, how much space does it take up. So when you take the mass and divide it by the volume, you get the density. And the neat thing about density is that when you add liquids of differing densities, they will separate based on density. The most dense liquid will be on the bottom, all the way up to the least dense on the top. Now we have two different procedures. You choose the one that best fits your needs and your students. So option one is with Karo syrup, or actually you could just use sugar too, plain old granular sugar, but it's easier to get Karo syrup to dissolve. So the first thing you want to do is you want to heat your water, okay, because the sugar dissolves quickly in warm water. It'll dissolve in cold water, it'll just take longer. And then you dispense out 1 cup of water for each color. Now I just arbitrarily chose these colors. You could pick whatever colors you wanted. To make my red, I used 8 tablespoons, 6, 4, and 2. And then you need to stir and make sure that these cool before you use them, okay? Because if they are all hot, that's not going to give you the good result that you want. Now the version using the sugar is going to look slightly different from the next version. Option 2 gives you more distinct layers. Okay, so if you want to use completely unique liquids, this method will give you very, very distinct layers. And I'll show you what they look like. So to make the red, basically you just dilute a little bit of Karo syrup. Okay, I said 1 tablespoon of water and 5 tablespoons of Karo syrup. I mean, that ratio is basically you just want to dilute the Karo syrup so it's not super thick. To make the green, we basically did the opposite. 2 tablespoons of Karo syrup in 1 cup of water. That's the same as this ratio right here. Okay. For the yellow, we just used straight up olive oil, no modifications to it at all. And then the blue was straight up rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol from the pharmacy. That works perfectly. And again, no modifications there. Just as before, you can dye these liquids any color you want, but just make sure that if you're trying to dye olive oil, you need to make sure that you're using a food coloring that's oil-based, or in other words, that's fat-soluble. Because if you just add regular old food coloring in the little droppers to olive oil, it's not going to dissolve. So just make sure that if you're trying to dissolve olive oil, you make use of a fat-soluble food coloring. Or you can just leave it alone because olive oil is already yellow. So now I'm going to show you both versions, and then you can choose the one that best suits your class. One of the things that you need to do is you need to purchase a few things. So you can use actual test tubes. These are not test tubes. These are actually bead tubes. So if you go to like a craft store, these are for if you do a lot of, making necklaces and that sort of thing. You can buy these to store your beads. And so these are bead tubes. That's what they're called. They're really inexpensive. You can also buy actual test tubes online or, from a homeschooling store, that sort of thing. But bead tubes are pretty inexpensive. And then we also bought pipettes, disposable pipettes. You can buy these online. You can also just use eyedroppers. Either one's fine. But you do need to use either an eyedropper or a pipette. You have to gently pipette the liquid in. Okay, you can't just dump it. So that's the reason why we're using the pipette. And when we do these experiments with the students, we use these as our vocabulary words. We say, okay, scientists use a lot of different tools. One of the tools is, what is this called? And then we give the students a chance to see if they remember what it's called. We tell the students that it's a test tube. You don't have to tell them that it's a bead tube. We just tell them it's a test tube because it looks like a test tube. And then we ask the students, okay, do you remember what this is called? And we see if they have a chance to remember it, right? We always want to try to teach them some vocabulary. So I'm going to demonstrate option 1 first using the Karo syrup. You'll see that the rainbow tube that it produces is going to be very different from the rainbow tube of the option 2. So the goal here are my solutions. The goal here, again, is you want to add this slowly. Now the first one, you can add it as quickly as you want. It doesn't matter. But after that first one, you want to pipette it carefully. You can't just dump it. So there's our first color. And you always want to add the most dense first. Okay, the most dense goes on the bottom, and we want to add it first. Now we're going to add our next solution. And the ideal thing to do is put your test tube, put your pipette right on the edge and slowly drop it up on top. Now you will initially see some mixing. That's okay. That's going to happen. Okay, I'll hold up a white piece of paper in just a minute so you can see it more clearly. Our next color is green. Again, you want to put it right up on the side. Pipette slowly. And this might be more challenging if you have young students. So preschool age, probably not the best option to go with, unless they are incredibly patient. Elementary school, though, they could handle this for sure. Teach them some of those fine motor skills. And then our last color, right on the side. Pipette slowly. Because if you just dump it, you kind of get a mess. And so here's what option 1 looks like. Okay, the colors are, the layers are pretty minimal, and the blue and green actually look kind of the same in this lighting. But I promise you, on my version, they do look better. That's what you get for using an iPad, right? All right, now let's go to option 2. Option 2, the layers are going to be a lot more distinct. And so this is why this option is probably better if you're working with young kids, because it doesn't require you to be so careful about how you order it. I mean, how you add the liquids. So again, our most dense one goes on the bottom. So we get our test tube. We got our little list here. Most dense goes on the bottom. And just kind of drop it in. Next we have our green. Right along the side there. So as you can see, compared to the previous method, the layers are a lot more distinct. Then comes the yellow. And then comes the blue. So in the second method, you see much more clear, distinctive layers. Again, depending on the age of your students, though, you might want to go with the first method. It just depends on how old your students are. Because if you're doing this with older kids, you could maybe do one first and then the other, and then try to have the students explain, well, how come one's got distinct layers and one doesn't? In the first method, they're all sugar solutions, and all we're doing is modifying the concentration. Whereas in the second scenario, we've got completely unique liquids. And so even you can actually take this into your high school chemistry students and start talking about some intermolecular forces and all sorts of fun stuff. So these are two different density columns. We hope you enjoy working on them with your students.